I'm Charlie. I'm with ERA, which is one of the big accelerators here in New York City. And I'll let Mark introduce himself and go down the line.
Sure. Hey, I'm Mark Wachen. I'm one of the managing directors at DreamIt Ventures, which is an accelerator in New York, also programs in Philadelphia, Austin, and Baltimore. I also run a early stage fund called Upstage Ventures as well.
Hey guys, my name is Skyler Fernandes. I'm the managing director of Simon Venture Group. It's the largest venture fund focused on in-store retail tech and e-commerce. We just launched a new accelerator called Simon Launch. We're accepting applications up until the second week of January. We're giving $25,000 in cash, free office space for a year, and being part of the plug-and-play retail accelerator.
Hey guys, good to be here. I'm Alex Iskold. I'm the managing director of Techstars here in New York. Techstars is a gold standard for accelerators. We started in Boulder in 2006, and we now have programs that we run in 13 different cities around the world, and we've graduated over 400 different companies.
So let's get started. Alex, since you're the gold standard, can you tell us why a company should apply to Techstars over DreamIt, or over ERA, or over the Simon Accelerator?
Well, let's see. I think that companies decide for themselves which accelerators to apply to, right? Like, it's not for us to decide, but I don't really know what you guys do in your programs. I know what I do in mine. And, you know, Techstars New York is deeply focused on selecting a dozen or so companies every 9 months and working with them for, you know, through the course of like 3 months program and trying to really create, you know, valuable businesses. So we work super hard on creating great companies, and not just focus on like, hey, how can we get funding, but more about like, how can we create great businesses.
I'll add on to that a little bit to make it a little more controversial. So yeah, I think there is a significant difference in the accelerators in general. I think, you know, there's certainly been a huge increase in the number of accelerators that have been created over the past few years. There's certainly a handful out there that are almost looking, you know, they're brand new, they don't have much structure, and it almost feels like a scam if you're looking at it of like, why would I give them 5% of my company? And you really have to think, where are you going to get the biggest bang for your buck? Because obviously the capital is nice, but it's somewhat irrelevant compared to the equity that you're giving up. And so, for example, with Simon Launch, the reason that a company would apply to Simon Launch versus Techstars would be if you had a pure, you know, really strong retail tech focus or e-commerce focus, and you wanted to get exposure to the majority of retailers globally, given that Simon is your one-point contact to know every single major retailer at a high level. Versus if you're in a certain location, there might be Techstars there or 500 startups. I think sometimes it comes down to location too, of where your company is already based. But it really, I think, and brand goes a long way too. When you look at where have the most successful startups gone and come out of, and those are the ones that certainly are the most competitive to apply. And you're probably thinking to yourself, where do I have the best chance of getting accepted? And that oftentimes, I think, pushes startups of where they're applying.
Yeah, I would say there are a lot of good accelerators out there, and I think of whether it's ERA or Techstars or DreamIt.
Or Simon.
Or Simon. Well, no, what I was going to say, no, Simon, what Skyler just said here, I think is really important, you know, differentiator. There's a differentiator also, I think, between the programs that have been around for a little while versus some of the upstarts, in that I think one of the big values you get from an accelerator is also being able to tap into, not just the mentors and advisors, but the alumni as well. It's great to have conversations with mentors and people who have 20 years of experience and have built massively successful startups. It's also great to be able to talk to people who are maybe a year or two ahead of where you are, and have walked right in the same shoes that you have, and are still kind of right, on the front lines. And so having access to that alumni network is really important too. The other thing I would say, at least as far as from a DreamIt standpoint, is that I think that one of the things we like to differentiate on is being probably a little more open-minded than some other programs, not necessarily these fine ones here, but in that there's certainly some dogma that's about like having to have a tech co-founder or having to look a certain way or having to be from a certain background. I think we try to be a little more open-minded on some of those things. We're very focused on some of the entrepreneurial groups that maybe don't get focus or attention that they deserve. We were one of the first ones to have, or the first one, a program called DreamIt Access for minority-led companies. We have a new Athena program for female-led companies. So, so trying to make the entrepreneurial experience open to a broader canvas than what you typically see in other ecosystems.
So you touched on it, but how do you feel about companies that apply without a full-time tech resource or CTO co-founder?
Yeah, well, I'll just speak from our standpoint. I mean, certainly, all things equal, it's certainly better to have a tech co-founder, there's no doubt. Same company with or without the same exact company, I'd rather than have a tech person. But at the same time, we talk about that a lot, and I think one of the big mistakes companies can make is they hear, okay, I got to have a tech founder, so they go out and do a shotgun marriage and go to a meetup and just find someone, hey, you want to start a company? And then 2 weeks later, they're part of the management team, and those are almost always the ones that fail. So I think we would prefer to see a company where they've shown the scrappiness and been industrial enough to build maybe their first prototype or probably had to outsource it, but at least they got it up and running and got some feedback and are on the right path. And I think sometimes we've had a number of companies, I've had these in my own portfolio, where they went that route, and then because they had that additional traction and had actually, may not have been the greatest thing, they may have had to rewrite the whole technology platform, but it becomes that much easier to attract a great tech person because now they actually are more than just a piece of paper with a blank idea. Finding a tech founder is really challenging, and if you can, that's awesome. And again, we certainly prefer, and it's certainly ideal to have that. But if you don't, I don't think it has to be a showstopper.
Alex, have you guys had any success with companies that had no tech co-founder?
I can't recall anything in the New York program. I mean, the thing about our selection is the program is super competitive, so it's not really a vote against people who don't have tech co-founders, but it's more to Mark's point where in the end of the day it just ends up in such a way that we pick companies that are stronger, and typically stronger companies end up having a full team. But we're to your point, like we actually don't vote against single founders. For example, we would accept them, somebody who but they tend to be more of like a technical founder.
I think what I've seen, it really depends on what type of company it is. Because I think you're finding a lot of the companies initially were largely internet tech startups, and so having a full-time CTO was critical. But there are a growing number of companies that aren't necessarily an internet startup, and they need a different type of technical person, not necessarily a CTO, but someone else that can help them with either distribution or manufacturing that they're doing. So I think it depends what type of company you have. Are you an actual tech startup for online, or what stage are you at? Because you might be a company that you're no longer looking for initial market validation, and that's also not maybe why you're applying to the accelerator. I think a lot of times entrepreneurs are thinking, oh, if I get accepted to the top accelerator, I'll get market validation because I will have been selected as one of the top 5%. All the VCs will now know that I exist, and that's where you are. But on the other hand, you're seeing more and more companies that are applying to these top accelerators that have kind of already made initial traction, and they might not need a CTO as much as they need people that are actually executing daily operations.
So companies that are a little later stage, have any of you taken or worked with a company that's already been through a prior accelerator? How do you view companies that went through a prior program, either here in New York or elsewhere, applying to you for this next session, for instance?
Well, we look at it on a company by company basis. Traditionally, we don't take companies after other accelerators. I mean, the question is like, what happened and why didn't the company, achieve everything that they needed to achieve in the previous accelerator? Having said that, you never say no. One of the companies from Techstars Boulder is going through IC now, so you've got that going. We try to be super open-minded about these things, and just it all depends on the company.
I think my accelerator is brand new, so I haven't had a class yet. But talking with last week, I was talking with a guy named Marvin from 500 Startups, and he mentioned that he's seeing an increasing number of companies that they're accepting into 500 Startups that came from prior accelerators, mainly because those prior accelerators sucked and they got no value out of it. And so they said, we need to go to a place where we can get hopefully a higher value and have been a little bit more polished. And you're also, again, you're finding that I think overall, because these accelerators are becoming so much more competitive, you're finding that there's a leaning towards how later stage can you go to accept a company into an accelerator program, and kind of the accelerator itself is de-risking itself by actually accepting a little bit, not pure early stage, but companies that might have actually have $100,000 of revenue already into the program, and it's becoming so competitive that they can now accept companies like that.
I would say that, yeah, I mean, there's probably, I would say over the 7 years of DreamIt, certainly the average company is probably further along than it has been. And it doesn't necessarily mean that there's the only reason there's maybe, if you call it a bias, it's only because like Alex was saying, I mean, it's a very competitive process. So obviously to the extent that you have more traction and all that, it just helps your candidacy for sure. But there's still, ultimately a lot of the bet you're making is on the team, and if it's a great team, if it's an amazing team, and maybe they don't have much traction yet because they're just starting out, that still can win the day.
And one thing I'd like to say that also is maybe somewhat controversial, but I think it's one of the pain points for entrepreneurs is similar to like when you're raising angel capital, you get mad at the angels because like, why aren't these angels taking risks? Like they want to invest in a company that's already, has 100,000 plus in revenue. They're not looking to bet on something with just purely a concept. And probably the same aggravation starting to happen with accelerators is, well, I need the help of an accelerator, but the ones that are getting accepted are the ones that don't need it. Like this is not fair. And so I certainly have heard that from lots of entrepreneurs as things have evolved, and which I think probably why there's a need for different stages of accelerator programs. When you get to the concept of what is an accelerator, how much are you actually building your MVP versus accelerating the MVP?
Yeah, just to add on that quickly, I completely agree. There's probably, and accelerators are probably different in what stage they're probably optimal for, but I think in some cases, while it's true that a very early company may, could use the help, at the same time, they may be too early to benefit from some of the things that certain accelerators offer, because if we're introducing them to investors and other types of people, and they're way too early. I mean, it's always great to start that conversation, but at the same time, the investor might say, "Well, it's great." Might say, almost always will say, "That sounds really interesting. Keep me posted, and let's talk in 12 months." So, sometimes for certain, in certain cases, it's really not even necessarily in the company will get more benefit if they're a little further along, and there might be another incubator or other kind of program that might be better suited for them.
Yeah, I actually totally agree with Mark. What we're finding is we can help accelerating businesses a lot more effectively than accelerating pre-product stuff. Because if it's pre-product, then you and I are sitting in the room and we're looking at pixels and it's he said, she said, versus if we already have a product and if we already have a bit of a, not necessarily full product market fit, but we kind of have an idea and the product is already out there, we can really help accelerate the business. And I think that that's something that we can provide because we have a giant network, and not just really VC introductions, but mostly I think business acceleration in terms of, hey, I need to get in front of these customers is hugely helpful, and we can coach companies how to accelerate their sales. So I think would be increasingly more valuable at a later stage. And also my other thought is the world is fair. Whatever we get, whatever is happening is fair, meaning like it's a market, it's efficient. So like if it's kind of saying like, hey, I went to Lehigh, but I'd rather would go to Harvard. Well, no, I went to Lehigh, so that's what it is, right? So, but I think the world is pretty fair.
What's wrong with Lehigh?
Nothing, exactly.
So aside from being late stage enough where you have a product sort of in market or an alpha or beta product that you can show and do business deals, how does a company make the most out of an accelerator experience? It's a short period of time. What's the one thing they should really be looking to do to maximize their 4 month and their equity that they're giving up for this program?
I'd say a couple things. One, I think it's really important to, I mentioned the kind of alumni and the other people in your program. When we talk to companies at the end of a program and we ask them their feedback on what was the most valuable, inevitably one of the things that always is at top, if not close to the top, is the whole community piece of it, is being in a room with all these other really smart people who, again, are right there on the front lines with them. They're not competing with them, and they're just a tremendous resource for them. And I think one of the regrets that some of the companies have is they say, like, gosh, I only really got to know these guys in the last couple of weeks really well, and I wish I had really gotten to know them earlier. So I think taking advantage of that, of not just sitting, I mean, obviously you want to be working really hard, but also, open your eyes to the rest of the room and all the people in there. I think that's one. The other one I was going to mention was that any Beatles. This is an older crowd, it looks like, so there probably are people who are Beatles fans here. I always like the line from the end. The love you take is equal to the love you make. And as I say that with accelerators, I mean, really the companies that get the most out of it are the ones who are the most proactive and are the squeaky wheel and reach out to the partners and don't just wait for stuff to be spoon-fed to them. So if you're proactive, you're going to get way more out of it than if you're just sitting there waiting for the resources to show up.
I would say do it for the right reasons. I think if you are doing it just to be that market validation that you're accepting the accelerator, it's probably a bad reason. And again, whether or not you actually need it. There's a lot of great companies that don't need to be part of an accelerator and can do just fine without being in one. So if you're so far along, why give up the equity? Then don't feel pressured to do so. I think the common feedback I've also heard, and everyone's always said this in rooms when you're talking about accelerators, is what was the actual value from it? Oftentimes you hear that the best value is I learned how to pitch. To basically learn how to pitch, you just pitch over and over and over again. And there is a program. All of these accelerators have programs. But I think just like why do people go to HBS, it's not for the classes, it's for the introductions and the network that you're building. And that's probably the best leverage for a lot of these accelerators is, again, think what is the most useful for you. And if it's introductions for like introductions to capital, introduction to partners, then some of the top accelerators have those relationships. But if you don't need introductions to capital or key partners, then you should really think, does this work for you? But make sure it works for you more than it's just working for the accelerator.
I think for us, it's a little bit different. I definitely encourage companies to have a very clear goal for the program. In general, without having a goal, you sort of meander and you're not successful. So from our perspective, the reality is a lot of companies hope to raise financing on the demo day. But the trick is if you spend all your time and effort focusing on the financing, you historically don't end up raising it. So instead, our focus is pretty straightforward. We're focusing on growth and understanding how this is a real business. And so our entire effort through the entire 13 weeks is on how can we grow? And literally every company has KPIs and we're trying to move them forward. It's super hard. But we find that, focusing on numbers, focusing on growth is what ultimately leads to A, validating the business, and then B, follow-on funding.
So those are all reasons how you could be successful. Are there any, and I'm sure there are, experiences where companies have had bad experiences in the accelerator? And what are those typical reasons?
Bad in what way?
Someone was unhappy and regretted their decision after the 13 weeks?
We typically don't have that, but I think, I mean, that's
at least
that's
we
like
don't talk about it.
That's
Yeah.
like a very, well, we talk about everything, but this is sort of like very on the left. I think, to me, the biggest bug that I've seen is people don't realize that they're on the clock, and it's a very unique experience. It's 13 weeks, and stuff that's happening is different depending on what week you're on. And just in general, having a clear goal and maximizing, what you achieve during the 13 weeks. Some companies, go in and they say, well, we don't really want to fit into the fact that we're going through a program. And you kind of do have to fit because it's a very unique time during the life cycle of your company. So I think you're better off understanding that you're an accelerator and having clear goals.
Yeah, I'd say the companies that have the least best experience are the ones where again, I think a lot of it comes down to the team dynamics, where the team runs into interpersonal issues, or again, they put together the team very kind of right before they were in the program, and they just don't get along. I mean, putting together your founding, time out.
Keep going, keep going.
So it's like a marriage. Like I mean, people have been saying that for ages, but it's true. When you're starting a company, you really want to be very thoughtful about who you're starting it with. And so the companies that come into a program and haven't been that thoughtful about that and run into issues, they spend a lot of their time just trying to resolve those issues and trying to build a business. And before they know it, I mean, 3 months goes by very quickly. And if you're infighting the whole time, you're not going to have a good experience.
So at risk of Andrew never inviting us back again, I'm going to ask one more final question. One more minute. All right. We're all in New York here, which means we obviously love New York. But why should a company really consider Techstars, DreamIt, ERA, or Simon in New York as opposed to Y Combinator or 500 startups on the West Coast, which aren't as cool as New York accelerators? But specifically, why aren't they as cool?
I'd say that the reason for Simon would be because you have an opportunity of doing both New York and Silicon Valley. So you'd be working with us for a retail brand, the majority of fashions in New York City. Plus you get to go to the accelerator in Silicon Valley at Plug and Play and use potentially one of our real estate space that you can rent for a year, which is along Sand Hill Road at a mall. So you get access to all the VCs there, plus being able to test out your technology in a real life example.
Yeah, I think the proximity to industries in New York. I mean, New York is the tech industry is great and it's growing and all that, but obviously we have finance, we have fashion, we have media and advertising and all these other things. So one of the things that we emphasize, and I'm sure and all of us emphasize, is getting out and talking to customers. I think it's a lot easier to do that when a lot of your customers are within 10 or 20 blocks of you than you have to get on a plane every time you want to talk to a customer.
Yeah, I think it's because it's a lot colder and people are a lot less nice. Seriously speaking, I think, look, these are, so it's basically like two totally different opportunities. I think it's highly geographic. Some companies just prefer to be in specific geographies. I personally believe that New York tech scene is on a significant upswing, and it's incredibly exciting to start a business in a place where you have very significant upswing.
Great. Thank you very much, guys. Big round of applause for Alex, Skyler, and Mark.